Hey guys, John here from the Pastor Discussions podcast. This week we're talking about politics. We just had the midterm elections, and so we decided to have a discussion about how Christians should think about politics. How should we respond to elections when they don't go our way? What are some general principles that we should keep in mind as Christians when it comes to voting and participating in the political process, particularly here in America? So that's what we tackle this week. One other thing I wanted to let you guys know on the front end, we will be at the Bethlehem Conference for Pastors in Minneapolis in January, and we'd like to meet you. So if you're going to be there, go on over to pastordiscussions.com/meetup and fill out the form. Let us know. We're going to be sending out some info on a time and place where we can meet each other face-to-face in person, and actually have a real-life Pastor Discussions podcast. Episode 46 of the Pastor Discussions podcast starts right now.
He has wiped out, by his grace through faith in Christ, your every sin, past, present, future.
Christian hedonist is somebody who says that my greatest joy, my greatest good is God. And therefore, I will pursue that joy and I will pursue that God above all else. So God's glorified and I'm satisfied.
You are now listening to the Pastor Discussions podcast.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to episode number 46 of the Pastor Discussions podcast. I'm John.
And I'm Joan. This is your weekly conversation on doctrine, faith, and the Christian life.
And we're part of the Bar Podcast Network. You can find out about the Bar Podcast and get more biblical content for your ear holes by visiting thebarpodcast.com. So
you got through all of that except
that was
you had just one tiny little
pretty flawless.
Yeah.
Pretty flawless. Only 46 episodes to get something right. So, yeah, you can't expect much. It's free.
It is free.
Yeah. You get what you pay for.
The stuff that you have to buy if you want to support us isn't free, but
yeah, well, that's found at pastordiscussions.com/gear. We have some shirts and some
Resurrection
hoodies.
Coffee Co. is not free either.
Resurrection Coffee Co. is not free.
But it is worth buying.
You get what you pay for there too.
Yeah.
Because it's good.
It is good.
It is good coffee. So what's your week been like, man?
It's been busy.
It's always busy. We need to just stop saying that.
Yeah, that's true.
Saying your week is busy is like saying you're breathing. It just kind of is a given, which is fine.
It's been good. So we're like winding down our regular activities, and now we're into holiday season.
Yeah.
Woo-hoo!
Which brings with it a whole new group of things it's kind of like it just sort of shifts. Like things just sort of shift. It, like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, but I don't. So this will say something about me. I'm not a huge holidays fan because
Grinch.
Yeah, a little bit. Because with it comes all these extra like traditional things, and I'll just be honest. Like I'm not a huge traditional guy. I'm kind of anti-traditional.
Do you guys do anything for your family for Christmas? I've been asking this.
Yeah, because Michaela does a lot of that, or did a lot of that with her family. So we always open presents on Christmas morning.
We can't
we
shouldn't even be
just
talking about this
with just our family.
We have not consumed copious amounts of turkey yet.
That's true.
We can't be talking about.
So only Thanksgiving.
Yeah, but the what I like to call fatty season for me, where I gain a significant amount of weight, has begun with Halloween. So you're
snarfing candy then?
Yeah. So we didn't do like the Halloween thing, like with dressing the kids up and everything. We just stayed in the basement and watched a movie together and hung out together as a family and hid from all of the.
Dude, you missed your opportunity to share the gospel with
I did.
All kinds of people that come to your door.
But sometimes family time is more important. So we did that.
Only sometimes.
Seasons. So we did that, and then the next day I went to Walmart and got all of the Halloween candy at like deep discounts.
Yep.
So we have these bags of candy around here, including in my office, and I've been resisting the temptation to just munch on them.
Why would you put it in your office if you weren't going to eat it, though?
That's for other people that come here.
Oh,
that way they can have something, and I can.
It's also for me to grab and throw all over your desk for you.
Which, by the way, so Joe does this thing where he comes into my office and grabs a handful of candy and then just tosses it up in the air on my desk. and my Nalgene bottle was open, and this little like flavored Tootsie Roll landed in there, and I didn't realize it. And so I went to drink out of that about 3 hours later, and it was like a raspberry flavored water. It was gross. It's disgusting. So you win this round.
See, so our offices are very different. John's is put together, but for
me,
for you,
yeah.
But for any person, it looks kind of messy. And it has lots and lots of books.
Yeah,
my office has significantly less books, and is not so I don't have as much clutter because I just don't have as much stuff, which is all books I have guitars
for the most part. You fill your wall up with guitars.
Yeah,
I fill my walls up with books. All right, so what are we talking about today?
So in light of
so
it will be 6 days after the election.
Yeah.
So we thought we'd talk a little bit because we've got an interview that, we'll have to see how long this goes.
Yeah.
Because when you and I start talking about
that's
things,
true.
it can take a long time.
It does tend to go. We are long-winded.
Okay, so we thought we'd talk a little bit about the election and how Christians should be responding when things don't necessarily go the way they think they should have went.
Yeah, so the tagline for this is Doctrine, Faith, and the Christian Life. So this falls under Christian life. Like, how do we live in America where we have these rights and responsibilities to vote, but at the same time live as good citizens of a heavenly kingdom?
Right.
Yeah.
So how did this will be a terrible question for you because I already know the answer, but you can tell everybody else. How did the election, the turnout of the election affect you?
It didn't at all. It made not one iota of difference. There's some implications from it that Christians should think about. And I mean, I don't advocate that we bury our heads in the sand or anything like that, but I think underneath the surface, there needs to be a deeply seated confidence in God's sovereignty and that he raises up nations and lowers nations, that he turns the heart of the king like water or like a flowing stream, that he brings calamity and he brings prosperity and he's sovereign over those things. So it kind of irks me a little bit when people freak out over election results. And I sort of think of 1 Peter, like, don't be surprised when the fiery trial comes upon you as though some strange thing has happened. Just like we shouldn't be surprised by suffering in our life, and we shouldn't be surprised when things don't go our way. We shouldn't be surprised when elections don't go our way and like all like poopy faced.
Yeah, I always find it amazing that like when elections don't go the way believers think they should go, that somehow they think the country's going to take a downturn. Yeah. Like the country's been in a downturn and going downhill for a long time. And we should expect it to go that way as believers. And there's somehow, I think we intellectually grasp that. And yet at the same time, look at America as a Christian country built on Christian values. And if we would just get back to those things, then we'd prosper.
Right.
And in doing that, we forget that this country's full of sinners just like every other country is full of sinners.
Right.
And the effect of sin is, ultimately going to lead to destruction and death.
Mm-hmm.
So no matter where we're at in that track, we're still on the downhill trend going towards the end, whenever that's going to be.
Right.
So we should be expecting things to get worse and for Christians to become persecuted in this country just like they are in other countries. So it seems like it almost seems like we expect it to go opposite of what we know is going to happen.
It's not going to go that way though, because we're going to get raptured before that happens.
Why'd you have to go there? Why'd you have to do it? I was very, very careful.
I know you were very cautious.
To not go
very cautious, but I'm not. So I'm a bulldozer. So this is the thing that I think there's a few things that contribute to this as we think through this. Like, I think number one, fear contributes to this because we're so afraid of having to live in a way that's distinct from the culture
and that stands out from the culture and that receives ridicule and condemnation from the culture. Here's what I mean by that. Since the founding of America, for the most part, up until fairly recently, it hasn't been hard to be a Christian culturally.
I would agree with that, yeah.
Moral norms have very closely, at least from a public standpoint of what's acceptable and what's expected, have paralleled Christian values significantly. In fact, I don't argue that there wasn't an influence of Judeo-Christian values in the founding of America. So we're founded upon some principles of morality that coincide with Christianity. So when we see the culture taking a turn, it can become very easy to become fearful because now we're the minority. We're not the majority. It's not easy to be a Christian in a culture that is advocating for the murder of babies and the gender fluidity and all of these other things. So we're afraid maybe that we're going to stand out. We're afraid that we're going to be the minority. We're afraid that people are going to ridicule us, look down upon us. I think there's also a fear like, I don't know how to defend my position. I just know what my position is. So there's a fear that comes into there. And the reason I said that about the rapture is because our eschatology plays into how we handle these things and how we view these things. So if we have a post-millennial view, we're going to think that everything's going to get better and better and better and better and better until Jesus comes. If we have a dispensational premillennial view, we're going to think, well, we're not going to be here for the bad stuff. And my argument is we're in the bad stuff.
Right.
And so we need to learn to live as sojourners and exiles, like First Peter calls us to. And that's why I say we vote as those who belong to a different kingdom.
Right. So one of the things that we seem to forget is that this is not, like you were talking about being exiles and sojourners, this is not our home. So why a lot of people seem to put their hope in our politics. And I get it that we should be voting in a way and promoting in a way things that we think are valuable to Christians.
Right.
But those things don't end. Their end is not in the political candidate who wins the election. God is still sovereign and still in control. And for some reason, whenever we go to the voting booths and we vote and things don't go our way, it's like we all of a sudden forget that God's still working out his plan.
This wasn't a surprise to him.
Right. And he's going to use the person that he's put in office to accomplish his plan.
But here's where the trick is, because we've so conflated America and Christianity that we think that God's plan is always to prosper America and uphold America.
Right. And I don't, like, I get it that's where I think what we know to be true versus what we want to be true it has a disconnect.
Yeah.
Because we know these things are going to happen. We know things, even if you're a dispensational pre-trib, pre-mill, you know things are still going to go down a little bit before that happens.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. So you know that the world's progressively going to get worse, unless you're a post-millennialist, which in our context, I don't think we have.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever met one face to face.
Yeah, I mean, I know guys.
They exist. They're like a unicorn. They're out there somewhere.
Doug Wilson is not a unicorn, just so you know. So those things are going to happen, and yet at the same time, it's like those things aren't going to happen in America. They're going to happen somewhere else.
Yeah, exactly.
They're going to happen around the world, but in America, we're going to have this utopia where things are just going to be Christianese and everybody's going to have these good morals. Well, that's not how it's going to happen. And I don't think Scripture points us to that. And we can see those things playing out in our society. And I think Christians are rightfully offended by those things.
Yes.
Okay. And so, but their fix to them is not necessarily they need the gospel. Their fix to them is we need the right politician in office to get the Christian values that we need. And I almost wonder if some of this has to do with how we view morality. Yeah. Is morality something that makes Christians, or is morality, true morality, that flows out of a believer's heart. Like we're going to talk about this because this is what we always go back to. But at its core, Christians have affections for Christ, and the morality that they have flows out of their love for him.
Exactly.
And we tend to separate that and expect immoral people to act morally. And if they act morally, then we'll have a Christian nation.
Right.
And it's completely opposite. They need Christ, and they need new hearts. And out of that is going to flow morality that actually has, is going to affect change, because you have changed people acting morally versus just wretched people going on their way to hell who happen to act morally because they think
externally moral.
Right.
People.
They think that those things are either going to get them to heaven for a lot of people, for Catholics. I mean, at least if you
hold to the Roman Catholic doctrine,
right, then you're working your way, you're keeping yourself on your way. Same thing with Mormons,
Jehovah's Witnesses, all of those,
right. So they're working their way. So, or it's just that moral imprint that we have, that we know certain things are good and certain things aren't.
I think there's also an element to it of cultural pressure. So when my dad was growing up, if you
in what way?
In as far as like society's accepted moral norms. So when my dad was growing up, if you got a girl pregnant out of wedlock, there was a huge shame factor, and the shame
there's an
factor,
expectation that you would marry that.
Exactly.
That
there was a cultural morality that was generally accepted across the spectrum, and that's why I say that happened to parallel Christian morals. But now, I got something in my throat. I don't know what's going on. But now, the morality that's accepted in general, maybe necessarily hasn't deviated as far as the media would portray it to have deviated. But what catches the spotlight and what gets focused on is this radically different morality.
And even celebrated.
And it's celebrated. Yeah, absolutely. Which then influences and drives the morality of the culture, because people that are not Christian are like, well, I guess, I can't really argue with that. And they don't have that foundation of Christ and the gospel to fall back on. And so there are not as many social pressures and good social pressures, I would say, or expectations on people to where the morality that our kids are growing up in, the moral climate, the moral culture that our kids are growing up in, is so radically different even from the one that we grew up in.
That's a good point. I also wonder if some of the fear of that being the reality drives a lot of people to put a lot of their hope and energy into certain candidates that they think will redirect the country.
Never fails. It was almost a good episode.
Redirect the country to a spot where they think they'll bring those morals back to either like what they grew up in, that type of environment, or redirect us back to a spot where they think it's going to have a widespread effect and people will stop diving into these realms that are sinful realms and even celebrating those things or saying that they're good, and move us back to where we used to be.
Yeah.
Well, where they saw we used to be, where those things were still real and there, but they were masked and they were hidden and you couldn't see them.
That's the key, though. That's the key, is the restraint to not perform immoral actions, or the restraint to not act a certain way, did not come from a love from Christ any more then than it does now.
Right.
And by that, I mean, that social pressure kept people from doing stuff for fear of exposure and shame, versus fear of offending or concern of offending God and his holiness and his righteousness.
So if the culture would swing back to more of that shame in, like you had a great example, like homosexuality was shamed 50 years ago, way more than it is now. Children out of wedlock, divorce was looked at differently.
Fornication and immorality outside of marriage.
So those things, I'm convinced they still
did it.
They still were as prevalent. Hidden. It was just hidden.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't actually fix the issue.
Exactly.
Like having good morals and having that culture of this is what generally we expect, that doesn't fix the issue.
Exactly.
It just hides it.
And here's why I'm kind of encouraged for the church, because this new moral climate that everybody's so fearful of does two things, I think. Number one, it exposes the
fake
true nature of where the church has failed. We've failed because we've gotten drawn into morality or moralism, not morality. Morality is good. Moralism is bad.
Yeah.
We've been drawn into moralism to where the unbeliever and the believer who both act moral are virtually undistinguishable from one another. And what this new morality is doing is it's exposing the lack of belief that has always been in the country, but that has been ignored. The second reason I'm encouraged by this is because this gives tremendous opportunities for the gospel to shine forth as the true power to change.
Yeah.
The problem with hoping in politics, and I'm be careful here, because I'm not saying don't be involved in politics. And I'm not saying don't be a good steward of your vote and your responsibility, your civic responsibility as an American. But hoping in politics is incapable of bringing about the change that really needs to happen in order for that exposed immorality that's celebrated now to be dealt with at a heart level. The best that politics can do is enact laws that go back to masking it and hiding it and pushing it under the surface where people look clean on the outside, but inside they're filthy and full of dead bones. And so this is a really cool opportunity, I think, for the church to be salt and light and to show the power of the gospel, because you've got people like Rosaria Butterfield who were in a homosexual relationship and was a professor, a liberal professor at a university, and the gospel radically transformed her and causes her to live differently now. And that's a powerful witness.
Politics don't transform people or culture.
Yeah.
The gospel is what people need, and that's what's going to transform them. That's what's going to, if you think like the culture, do we want to see it turn? But we want to see it turn for the right reasons.
Yeah.
We want to see people radically change, like Rosaria, to God from where they were at. So that only happens if they change at their core.
Yeah.
So you can't affect people in that way through politics.
Yeah.
And I think so many Christians get that intellectually, but yet they still can't get past this Republican only, right wing only. We've got to have conservative politics if we're going to get the country going in the right way.
Well, and I would quickly follow that up by saying, like, I think that government does have a responsibility to enact just laws. For example, outlawing abortion. I think that is an area where I can vote on that issue.
But that's not that's not specifically Christian. That's a human thing that's been imprinted on every being, whether they're Christian or not. That's different. Like I think a lot of believers think that the Christian values of not just abortion, but of things that have to do with the gospel are directly affected, and in much in the same way that we've relinquished taking care of the poor to the government, and we've relinquished how we take care of widows and single moms, and we have these things with welfare and food stamps, and we've relinquished all of that stuff to the government, and then we complain about it.
This is maybe a good question to gauge where your heart is at if you're listening to this and sort of maybe struggling with what we're saying. If America all of a sudden became a socialist country, would that cause your faith to waver?
That's a good question.
If America elected socialist representatives and socialist president that moved us in a socialist direction, would that cause you to? I mean, would you freak out? Now I'm not talking about like, okay, now I got to figure out how to live in this. I'm not talking about like, man, this is the wrong direction to go. I'm talking about, would that expose an idolatry of America? John MacArthur preached a sermon a while back called "Can God Bless America?" That was really pretty profound. And I think what we need to understand and what we need to grasp is that our citizenship is not primarily in the United States as Christians. Our citizenship is in heaven, and we have a sovereign king who is reigning and ruling. And there is no promise in Scripture that America is somehow exempt from God's judgment that we see in Romans chapter 1. As we went through Romans chapter 1, what we see in our culture, what we see around us is man suppressing the truth and unrighteousness, and God giving him over to his wickedness and iniquity. He gave them over to their sinful desires. That's what we're seeing in America. Now, if that bothers you, my question is, why does that bother you? Is it because you have this idea that we're exempt from that can't happen here? And if so, where does that come from? Because it doesn't come from the Bible, I don't think.
Right. But I'm just finish the point that I think I was taking too long to get to is that.
Did I sidetrack you? I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. This is how we talk.
Yeah.
If you're listening to this, you're sitting into our conversation. This is how we have discussion. My thought was the reason this happens is because people who are believers that are part of churches see the government as an extension of the church. That the government is supposed to take care of some of these things that the church has let go of. And when we go into these directions, they see it as an attack on the church because there's a difference. The American government is taking us away from what the church believes. They are not the church just because we've given up some of the things that we're supposed to do.
Yeah.
Like this is an opportunity when, like if that would happen for the church to step up and to step into what they should be doing, which is taking care of the poor and the needy, taking care of the widows, going out and fulfilling the Great Commission and sharing the gospel. We want to see our elected officers do that, I think, and I could be wrong on this, so you can push back if you want. I think that we do that because we don't want to have to do those things ourselves.
Well, and I think maybe the disproportionate emphasis that we place on politics versus sharing the gospel in our own personal lives is an indicator of that.
I would agree.
Like how many people are as passionate and zealous about their neighbor that they've lived next to for 10 years hearing the gospel as they are about making sure that a certain representative gets elected and putting signs out in their yard and campaigning for them and talking about it on Sunday mornings and everything else.
Christian values are good, but Christian values separated from the gospel and people's need for it.
There's nothing Christian about them at that point.
Right. We've got to connect that.
Yeah.
People aren't going to come to faith just because our country has the conservatives in charge who happen to have some of the same values that we have.
Yeah.
That's not going to convert the country.
Yeah, what was that? I said, I posted this on Facebook. You referenced this a little bit earlier. How I think Christians should approach elections. Vote, but don't hope. Vote as a good steward, but don't hope in the government. And I think that kind of encapsulates how to think through these things. So, okay, we're on the tail end of a midterm election. The House didn't go the way that a lot of Christians, and I'm saying a lot because there are Christians on both sides of the political aisle, which is another show for another day. But it didn't go the way some Christians, maybe many Christians, perhaps even most Christians in America would have liked for it to go. And so there's a temptation to be despondent and discouraged and walk around with a pall over you as though some incredibly difficult thing that was unexpected and that has somehow outside of God's will has happened. When I'm advocating, like, be a good steward of your vote, like vote according to your conscience, vote according to your values, vote for the person that you think is going to best serve as a representative of God as part of the government, but don't hope in that.
Yeah.
If you're hoping in that, you're going to get let down because everything in this world, everything that we hope in outside of Christ and the gospel lets us down.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, where the problem is. The problem is not in political involvement. The problem with a lot of Christianity in the past has been hoping in the government, hoping in elections. And I remember when Bill Clinton got elected, my dad was like, "Well, there goes the country," and then we can see a trend over the course of time, but do you really believe that somehow that's on you? Like, could you just conceive of the fact that maybe God is judging America by giving her the leaders that he's giving her, and that's his will for America?
Yeah. Well,
if so, are you okay with that?
Right. And there's a lot of things that tie into how we see that. So does our eschatology, or does the way we see morals and how they play out, do those things outweigh our identity in Christ, that we're not from here, and that things here are not going to be the way they're supposed to be? Yeah. We're not going to see heaven this side of heaven.
Yeah.
So maybe we need to stop hoping in our politics to accomplish that in the meantime.
So we've been in Sunday school, we've been going through Jeremiah 29 with I
was listening to it's funny now. We've been walking through that, and I was listening to our local radio station here, and a lot of people have that verse.
Yeah.
And somebody actually had the Jeremiah 29:11 through 14.
Oh yeah,
all the way through the my heart will seek after me. You'll find me when you seek after me with all your heart.
Yeah.
And I'm just like,
no. Well, and so one of the things that Jeremiah says in there is seek the good of the city while you're there.
Yeah.
So I think one of the ways that we seek the good of the city, the country, in this case, that we're living in, is to seek to elect men and women that will govern justly, and that
so I can completely agree with that. But is seeking the good of the city we live in, does that not include living out our faith, which requires us to share the gospel with people?
Yeah, and that's what I was gonna say next. Like, it includes politics, but it's primarily the gospel.
And I think we get those two things
exactly.
switched around.
That's exactly what I was getting at. We take the greater and make it the lesser, and we take the lesser and make it the greater. And so I hope you're not listening to this and hearing us say we should just abandon voting or anything like that. I'm not arguing or advocating for that at all. I'm advocating for being a good steward, but doing it in a way that's seeking the good of the city. Is your vote the best vote to love your neighbor as yourself? But is that a part of a greater strategy to love your neighbor and love your community and love your nation through sharing the gospel and living out your faith in front of others and pursuing Christ as your treasure and your hope being in heaven and not here?
Right. Do you emphasize and do you value being a citizen of heaven and being found in Christ, or a citizen of America, and you kind of get tossed to and fro by whether the country is being ran by the right or the left?
Yeah. And when we consider these things and think about these things, if we have a good view of the extent of God's sovereignty, there's no need to fear.
Yeah.
There's no need to freak out when the election doesn't go the way we think it should go. It's not like God's sitting on his throne and he took a bathroom break and came back and everything was all jacked up.
We may have to make some adjustments.
Exactly.
If we live here.
And that's my point.
But that's not a reason to get downtrodden or feel bad or start to worry.
And that to me is an indicator of where your hope is. Yeah. If election results cause stress and concern, like not just like I'm concerned about the direction of the country. I'm talking about like the type of obsessive type of watching of cable news networks type of thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a pretty good indicator on where our hope is. So yeah, that's my 25 cents on that.
Right.
I don't know.
So I think my encouragement to people would be, it's not that we don't care. It's not that we shouldn't vote, and it's not that we shouldn't talk about these things or inform ourselves. But remember what your goal as a Christian is, and remember what our goals in voting are.
Yeah.
So it's not to make things better, necessarily better for us, although those things can happen. But it's, okay, how is this going to grow the kingdom? How is this politician worth my time in prayer versus this one not?
Yeah.
So whether Barack Obama's in office or Donald Trump's in office or Bill Clinton or George Bush or whoever it is, and then all the way through down to your local city mayor.
Yeah.
Those people need your prayers on both sides. We're instructed to pray for them and to but let's not think that because one guy has an R and one guy has a D on the end of their name that one guy's saved and one guy isn't.
Well, not only that, like, how do you pray for leaders?
Yeah.
What is in 1 Timothy or 2 Timothy? I think it's 2 Timothy, 1 Timothy. It's 1 Timothy. You give petitions and prayers for leaders and kings. And what's the context? The context is that they would come to know Christ.
Right.
The context, like, so don't just sit there and pray like, Lord, I pray that they would vote Republican this time. I pray that they would, like, it's not necessarily bad to pray that. But if you're only praying that, that's showing that you really are not too concerned with.
Well, but my point is that no matter what side those guys are on, they need to know Christ.
Yeah.
And if they do know Christ, they need to be reminded of the gospel in their lives.
Yeah.
So let's be praying for those things on either side. Let's not just pray that this certain thing wouldn't happen or this certain person wouldn't make this decision or this person wouldn't be elected and this person would instead.
Yeah.
But whoever is there, are we praying for them faithfully? Do we care about their eternal security, whether it's going into one direction or another?
Yeah.
Like, do we care about their soul, or do we just care about the decisions they make that are going to affect us in our prayer life? So be praying for them, whatever side of the aisle they're on, and be praying for their salvation.
And this whole conversation is just a massive explanation of why politics don't belong on Sunday mornings. We gather as exiles. We're gathering to celebrate our heavenly King and to orient our minds on our heavenly kingdom that is waiting for us, our inheritance that we will step into when we die or when Christ returns. And so we at Arbor Drive intentionally do not bring politics into Sunday morning gatherings, because as we gather on Sunday morning, we're gathering as exiles. We're gathering. It's a gathering of people that don't belong here, but that are temporarily placed here, but their hope is not here. And it's just, if we confuse that, like the Freedom Sunday type of thing and the whole, some of the stuff that goes on with Franklin Graham, I think it is, or I can't remember. No, it's not Franklin Graham. Who is it? I can't remember.
I can't remember.
Robert Jeffress. Robert Jeffress. Like those types of things where it's Celebrate America Sunday and all of that, man, that is not what we're about on Sunday mornings. And it's not that I hate America. Look, if you're gonna email us about this, like 7 years in the Army, like I've punched my patriotic card. It's not that I hate America or I'm ungrateful for the freedoms that we have or anything like that. It's just when we gather on Sunday morning, our focus, our affections, our minds, our hearts, all of us should be oriented toward our heavenly inheritance and our heavenly King as a refuge and a respite from the world and all of the things going on in the world and the conflicts that we have there, but also as an anticipation and an encouragement and a bolstering of faith, so that we can go out and live as exiles.
Yeah, everything we are doing on Sunday should be pointing us to Christ and our Heavenly Father. And if it's not doing it, then it shouldn't be in the service.
Agreed. So cool. Well, there's that. Be encouraged after an election, whatever the turnout is, like whatever the outcome is.
And keep praying for your leaders no matter where they're at, and pray for their salvation.
Exactly. So we're not going to get to we've got an interview next week.
We got to find a topic that we don't have to.
Maybe what we ought to do is here's what I want you to do. Tell us your favorite Thanksgiving Friends episode.
Oh, yeah, we could.
What is your
that.
favorite Thanksgiving Friends episode? Let us know in the comments or on our Facebook page. You can go like that, or you can join our Facebook discussion group, Pastor Discussions Podcast. You can email us at pastordiscussions@gmail.com, or you can call us. The phone number is in the show notes. Let us know what your favorite Thanksgiving Friends episode is, and we'll talk about that next week. And then we're going to have an interview with a gentleman that does some amazing work and has some. I think it'd make a great Christmas present for the Christian in your life, whether they be a pastor or whether they be a friend. So, yeah, that'll be next week. So, it's going downhill. It's sort of like we started out really well, and it's just been.
Oh no, it's good. So join us next time for our next episode of the Pastor Discussions Podcast, your weekly conversation on doctrine, faith, and the Christian life.